And welcome, Congressman Adam Schiff. How are you?
I'm doing great. Shari, thank you so much for having me.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for gracing us with your time. I know you're super busy. I'll just give a very, very brief bio on you. Congressman Schiff is a proven leader who has earned the trust of Californians by taking on the toughest challenges facing our state and nation. From fighting for affordable housing and endless homelessness, ending homelessness, to defending our democracy, to lowering healthcare costs for working families, to leading efforts to protect our planet, Congressman Schiff has delivered real progress in California. He has become one of Congress's most effective leaders by bringing people together to get results. And now he is running for the US Senate because he knows that we can only lower the cost of grocery, gas, and housing if leaders work together and get the government and the economy working for everyone. I'm sure we could be here for a week marathon to learn about all of the details of the things that he has done in service of us. And I'm just so grateful. So here's what I wanted to ask you. What is it? What was it in the way that you grew up that sensitized you to this degree to the struggles of others?
I think it has a lot to do with so many families. The way I was raised by my parents, by my grandparents, the influence of my older brother. My grandfather was an immigrant, came to this country when he was, I think, 13. He was one of 10 children. The oldest were born in Lithuania. He was born in London. The baby, my great uncle, was born in Boston. My great uncle is now around 99.
Wow.
My father is 96, so we have some recent longevity in the family. Although my grandfather, who immigrated, died in his early 60s, so my father never expected to live a long life. But I think something about their experience and what they taught their children and grandchildren about, starting out with a shirt on your back, struggling to get by and provide for the family, the siblings looking out for each other, how each of us stands on the shoulders of those who went before, and how very lucky we are, and how we all have an obligation, when we do find good fortune, to give back.
Mhm.
It was an ethic that we were raised with, and my parents were not didactic. It wasn't as if they lectured to us. They taught us, as our grandparents did, really through their example, and that's probably the best way to teach. And I really do attribute, my sensitivity to those who are less fortunate to the way I was raised, because by the time my brother and I came along, we had a very middle-class upbringing. There were times, certainly, my father started out in the schmata business. He was a traveling salesman in the clothing business. I talked about him a lot on the campaign trail, and do, because when I was a kid, he made, I think, $18,000 a year, he told me, as a traveling salesman. My parents bought our first home for $18,000, and you could buy a home for your annual income as a clothing salesman. And I compare that to today and the struggles people have to afford their rent, or to, if they're lucky enough to buy a home. It's a very sharp contrast, but I learned those lessons about inequity, and to have compassion for others, and to feel a sense of obligation to others at a young age, because I remember when I was in college, I was lucky enough to go to a fine university, and I remember being in my dorm room sophomore year, and I shared the room with one other student. We had bunk beds. I was in the bottom bunk, he was in the top bunk, and we had kind of a classic college conversation. He came from a very, very well-off family in Michigan, um, and I remember saying to him, at about 1 in the morning, when we were still awake, do you ever feel guilty about going to this college, which looks like a country club, while there are people out there who are still looking for their next meal? And his answer was, nope. And I said, really? You don't ever think about that? How lucky we are, how fortunate we are, and how there are people out there that, don't have a roof over their head? Nope. And he said, life is a spin game. You can spin the dial and end up on handsome and you're handsome. You can spin the dial and end up on rich and you're rich. Or you can spin the dial and end up on you lose.
Mm.
And now this conversation was, God, it was more than 40 years ago, but I remember like it was yesterday, both because I remember how I felt about it, but I remember being so shocked about the kind of cavalier point of view that he had. And there have been other times in my life where I've had similar conversations and just had my breath taken away. I remember after the vote on the Affordable Care Act, I had office hours in the Glendale Galleria, and someone came up to me. I had my little poker card table set up in the Galleria. I looked like um, that booth in Charlie Brown, the psychiatrist in 5 cents. And the guy came up to my little table and said, how'd you vote on that Obamacare? And I could tell by the way he asked the question, my answer was not going to be the right answer. And I said, I voted for it. And he says, okay, I will never, ever, ever vote for you again.
Mm.
And there didn't seem a lot of point in engaging. So I said, I understand where you're coming from. And he turned to walk away, and then he stopped and came back to me and he said, can I ask you another question? I said, sure. What could you possibly have liked? What could you possibly have liked about that bill? And I said, well, actually, there are a lot of things I liked. I liked the fact that if you had a kid who didn't have health care in their job, they could stay in your policy until they were 26. I liked the fact that if you were a senior, it would help you pay for medication. I liked the fact that if you had a pre-existing condition, that you could get health insurance. I went through a bunch of things I liked in the bill. And then I said, and I like the fact that tens of millions of people that can't afford to get health care are going to be able to get health care. Now, I'd had a town hall with 3,000 screaming people. I thought I'd heard everything. But
Mm.
what he then said to me was something I had never heard. When I said, I like the fact that tens of millions of people who can't afford health care are going to get health care, he said to me, and you really think that's such a good idea?
Oh.
And I said, well, yes, I do. Don't you? And he said, no, I don't. If they can't afford it, they shouldn't have it.
Oh.
And I realized immediately that he was speaking for millions of people who would not say that even at a screaming town hall. Um, and, there are a lot of reasons for people not to like the Affordable Care Act. This is not a promotion for the Affordable Care Act. But it was striking to me that someone could be so indifferent to the inability of others to access health care when there are lots of people who are working their hardest and still can't afford health care.
Mhm.
And so I have to think, because I never went without health care, but I was horrified and am horrified by the idea that when my child was sick and bleeding at 2 a.m, and I rushed her to the hospital, I knew I could get good health care and I could afford it, that there are other parents who can't. And I can only think that it was because of how I was raised that I feel that way.
Wow. Um, Thank you for that. I just feel that it's so important that we try to deconstruct what has happened to our culture. And I'm sure we all have a lot of ideas. This happens to be a community we have met online. I love these people. I've never met them, but this is a community that comes together without judgment to just be creative, to do writing prompts and share what we've written, no criticism. And because of this safety that we've created with each other, people are really flowing with ideas and more confidence and comfortable in their own skin. How can we, since I know all of us really do care, in your estimation, how can we spread it? How can we approach what has been lost in terms of empathy and compassion and love your neighbor?
You know, I think part of what has happened to us is we have moved to a social media environment in which social is really probably the wrong descriptor. It's
Mhm,
more like the anti-social
mhm.
media, because people are sequestered away. They don't interact with each other, not in the same way we used to. I mean, people say things online they would never say in person, and also for young people, when when you're isolated or alone and you go online, you see what your friends are doing. It only heightens the feeling of isolation when people are posting, the best photos of themselves with other people, and you see your friends with other friends, and you weren't invited. Um, it's a very anti-social media, uh, and a lot of our institutions are in decline. In my parents' generation, there were the Lions Club and the Rotary and the Kiwanis, and there still are, but they're aging.
And they're
Their
not
population.
speaking to what's happening with people. Well, I just want to officially put out the offer. We've been doing this for 10 years with thousands of people, and it's been really effective. And we are offering our services to any part of the government in perpetuity.
Well, I was
You
going to
don't
say,
have to decide right now,
I,
but call me by 9.
Sure. I was going to say, the remedy is exactly what you're doing, which is creating community
Mhm.
and bringing people together through shared experience and through the arts and the narrative method. I think that's exactly what we need. There was a really interesting valedictory op-ed by David Volpe when he was retiring from the BEMA, and he was saying that the country's become a lot less religious, and without commenting on whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, there is a loss of community, just the
Mhm.
community of being in a church, in a synagogue, in a temple together, and there needs to be something where that brings us together.
I
Uh,
agree. And I also would like to say that we're beyond that. I mean, fine, go to your church, go to your temple, be in all of your groups. But we have so much to be gained by being in a diverse group where we teach each other, let each other in, and we feel each other. So, I don't want to say this is church because we have no mandate and there's absolutely nothing you have to do except respect other people. But I know you are busy. I thank you so much for giving us your time and your thoughts.
well, pleasure to be with you. Thank you all for inviting me, and I so grateful, Sherry, for what you do, and it's wonderful to see you. And Richard, good to see you too. But I hope you have a wonderful discussion tonight, and thank you all for being a part of it.
Thanks so much, Adam. Bye bye. Good
Thanks,
night.
everybody.